Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the lecture. Welcome to the College of Architecture and Design at Lawrence Technological University, and to everyone joining online through our YouTube channel. My name is Taka. I'm one of the assistant professors of architecture here at COAD. At the college, we believe the future of design is multidisciplinary, and we host a range of design degrees that includes graphic design, industrial and transportation design, game design, interiors, and architecture. We track design future trends, emerging technologies, and advancements in practice as a means of crafting education approaches in these areas. Our Design by Technology series allows us to engage in design discussions and offer a broad perspective on where we are headed in this industry. This Thursday, November 6th, Eric Zimmerman, who is a game designer and arts professor from New York University Game Center, will talk and present Playing with Systems at 12:30 p.m. After the lecture, he will offer interactive and fun systems thinking and games workshop. So please register for both of these events at our core events page as well. And today we are joined by Roy Decker and Anne-Marie Duvall Decker. They will give us a lecture titled Foundations, which will be followed by conversations, and we'll have the time for the question Q&A sessions as well. A little information about Duvall Decker Architects. They are from Jackson, Mississippi. Their work, their projects ranges from residential projects to larger institutional projects. They believe that privilege of designing the built environment is public act, and through architecture, they believe architecture should be both a radical act of service and hopeful artistic speculation. With this belief, they provide amazing architecture to underserved urban South while navigating cultural and complex cultural political complexity rooted to its history in the area. Individually, Anne-Marie Duvall Decker, she's a graduate of the Mississippi State University. Also, she received the Alumni of the Year Award in 2023. She was also appointed to serve as U.S. Department of State Bureau of Overseas Buildings Operations as 21 to 23 Industry Advisor Group Peer. She also received 2023 Architectural Record Women in Architecture Design Leadership Award. And she also has taught University of Tennessee, Mississippi State University, among other schools. Roy Decker, over there. He holds a Master of Architecture degree from Kent State University. He has taught extensively at Temple University and Mississippi State University. In 2023, Duvall Decker Architect's work was published in State of Housing Design organized by Harvard University, where he was asked to speak at the book launch symposium at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Roy and Anne-Marie, they were elevated to College of Fellows, American Institute of Architects. This is the honor only enjoyed by the 5% of the registered architects. When I was introduced to their work through a friend in common, I was scouring through website and looking at their work. I came across the lecture they made for when they won the Emerging Voices in 2017. Emerging Voices Award is granted by Architectural League of New York, and it's this amazing prestigious award. And award recipients every year present their work as part of the Architectural League of New York lecture series. And this is when I realized Billy Chen from Todd Williams Billy Chen Architects was the one to introduce them for their lectures. And as most of you know, Billy Chen was our keynote speakers at Show LTU, last Show LTU in May, and which it's needless to say makes me nervous that I have to introduce them in today. But I am happy for everyone here and online to have the chance to listen to them talk about their work. Jackson, Mississippi, and Detroit in Michigan. These are two different cities, but I think these two cities have very similar, there's a lot of the overlaps in cities. And I think both cities are in need and could use the design emphasis. And that's what the work of Duvall Decker Architects embodies through their architecture to elevate the people of lives of the people. And with that, please help me welcome Roy Decker and Anne-Marie Duvall Decker.
Good afternoon. It's a great room for seeing all of your faces. I can see most of your faces in the room. We are so happy to be. Thank you, Taka, for a wonderful introduction. And we've already gotten to spend such great time with Taka at dinner last night, even in the middle of the night. Thanks for taking us out to dinner. And we got to wake up in this wonderful Affleck house this morning after coming in the dark and not knowing anything about it. What a treat to wake up in such wonderful architecture with these fall colors. Fall has not yet made it to Mississippi, so it's fun to be forward in time here in Detroit. And thank you also, Andrea, for all your work in getting us here, and thank you, Gretchen, for having us. We are so pleased to be here. So as Taka mentioned, Roy and I, we are neither from Mississippi, but we founded our practice in Jackson, Mississippi in 1998 with really a simple, hopeful, and in retrospect, necessarily naive belief that all architecture is public work. So unlike a lot of other arts, what we do, and like a lot of other arts, what we do, people do not get to necessarily choose whether or not they interact with it. So the minute we put that out into the world, it is public, and that has a very special responsibility. And that's really been what has led us all of these years, that idea that it is public work. And that is true no matter who funds the work. So whether that's public work, which we've done a lot of, and particularly in the beginning of our practice, and that continues, it's also true even when individuals and private people fund the projects. It matters what that work does outside of its lot lines. So it is in this shared belief in the public value that really links all of these are all of the people who've worked with us over the years at Duvall Decker, and it's such a privilege to have had so many talented and conscientious people. We're all very different and a lot of different perspectives, but what really joins us together is this fundamental belief that the work is not about us, it's about the consequences of the work we do in the lives of all of the people that it touches. And Roy's going to talk to us a little more about how we ended up not being from Mississippi. Roy's from New Jersey, I'm from Tennessee, how we ended up becoming Mississippians. So go ahead, Roy.
And just to add my gratitude for being here. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat. Anne's from Tennessee, I'm from the Northeast. We both came about this practice from different places, but incredibly complementary partnership. And both of us felt like the profession was ill, that the focus on the architecture as an aesthetic event was overplayed, overvalued, and maybe over-celebrated across the profession and the industry. And through different circumstances, we both came to Jackson, Mississippi, me to originally teach and to practice after her university experience. Both of us got involved in the community. Both of us got involved with the broader community, the history of the place. Ann's original project, and you may talk about this, I may be jumping ahead.
Oh, I don't think so, you're good.
Was to work on the preservation of the Medgar Evers house. Medgar Evers was the chairman, the president of the NAACP in Mississippi, and was assassinated in 1963. And Ann's job was to investigate the house, the artifacts, the history, and write a historic structures report, and then go about the preservation of that house. And if Ann were telling this story, she would tell you she grew up in Tennessee with not a very good civil rights education. Me from New Jersey, I had a much better civil rights education than Ann did. So Ann was discovering this world of injustice. I was drawn to it, maybe because I thought the civil rights heroes were the heroes of our time, maybe much more than some others. So this practice that emerged in this place really drew us to the desire to know more about the history of Mississippi. So we really don't travel and talk about our work without bringing Mississippi with us. And to introduce you a little bit to Mississippi, I want to point your attention to the center two maps at the top of the screen. On the left is a representation of the indigenous population from about 1500 to 1830. In 1830, the federal government and also wealthy individuals recognized that Mississippi was some of the most fertile land in all of the world. The Mississippi had been flooding the northwestern portion of the state for years, millennium, and that soil was, in fact, prime for the growth of cotton and tobacco and other products. So in 1830, the federal government moved the indigenous populations west to Oklahoma off the land. The next map to the right is a census that was taken in 1860, and there were more African American enslaved peoples on the land than white people or indigenous people. So in 30 years, that land was transformed from a natural, thriving civilization to the enslavement of individuals working for an elite class, plantation owners. That land was sold to plantation owners from South Carolina and Virginia and populated and turned. First they cleared the land, sold the timber, and then proceeded to develop a cotton industry and wealth that was built on the backs of enslaved peoples. Greenville, Mississippi is one of the ports on the Mississippi we'll talk about a little later. We have a project there, which was one of the main ports for shipping all of those commodities down the Mississippi and across the world. So all the other maps chronicle this tragedy through time. Mississippi is still a place of poverty. It's still a place of lack of opportunity. It still suffers from school districts not having the resources or the teachers or the money to educate individuals. So this persistent injustice is still playing itself out. Just that's the start. But that's not the only part of this story. There are also heroes. This time is also chronicled by individuals who were saying, no, we need opportunity, we need justice, we need equity, we need opportunity for everyone. We need voting rights, we need women to participate in society. So these heroes that basically fought through civil rights protests, were authors, were musicians. You know, the musicians that came out of this place of injustice were the blues musicians. They changed music around the world. The artists, more Pulitzer Prize winners come from Mississippi than almost anywhere else in the world. Eudora Welty, Richard Wright, William Faulkner, many others. So these, for us, as Ann and I began to learn about Mississippi, became our heroes and our inspiration for finding a voice for an architectural practice in this place that could, in a way, do some good. And as naive as that sounds, finding a path for raising the question through architecture is what is public good in every project became our mission. So there's more to Mississippi. It's also a beautiful, lush landscape. It's still an agricultural landscape. The form of the land, even through the cities, is sloped and curved and not formed like Detroit, not formed like Washington, D.C. or other places where the earth and the land are carved and shaped and designed. Mississippi still is very much an agricultural state. Still, even the improvements in cities are kind of put on the land circumstantially and opportunistically. It's also still an agricultural economy, by the way. It is a place of extraordinary, beautiful light. When I moved there from the Northeast, I was struck by the porch light, the magic hours just before dawn and just after sunset. This kind of porch light, the penumbra of the in-between spaces, the penumbra of sitting with friends in these in-between places became an inspiration, and the character and quality of the place. It's also a place of incredible storms. You all remember Hurricane Katrina wiped us out. And Hurricane Katrina maybe is the most famous storm that came across Mississippi. Camille was an earlier one. But we get thunderstorms, the scale of this painting, all summer long, dropping deluges of rain on our landscape, on our buildings. Well, designing a building when you get 3 or 4 inches of rain per hour and then the temperature's at 90 degrees and inside your wall section is steam, how do you solve those technical problems for keeping a wall and interior safe? So this is a challenging technical place to build architecture as well. So it's out of all of these circumstances, the belief that the firm could do some public good, the work to find value and justice and equity through the work, that architects can't do everything. We have limited voice. Well, architecture is very quiet. But the question is, how can we steer that voice to do some good? Beautiful light, this poor landscape. How do you find funds for buildings? And then last, this question of the technology of just building durable buildings. There's no money for maintenance, so a lot of pressure on making buildings that last, that will endure and feel new after many, many years. So it's out of this circumstance where there are low fees, not enough skilled labor to build buildings. How do we design a firm? So the making of our firm became a design problem. So early, of course, we're a traditional design firm, working on projects, planning buildings. We realized it's really important to get out in front of projects because we needed to help our clients know how to think about what is a good building, how to think about what is an important contribution to their circumstances. As Ann said, it's the consequences of the work that matter. How do we help them have a voice to be their own advocates? So our planning work expanded. Obviously, architectural and interior design was part of our upbringing, but then there's not enough money for projects. We were often given projects with way too much need, not enough funds, and really set up for failure. So we got really good at what we call development consulting and development. Development consulting was a way for us to go find money and equity for our clients, bring that money to projects. New market tax credits, historic tax credits, low income tax credits, development incentives. There's lots of pools of money out there that we could find and bring to projects and help projects be realized where they might not otherwise be possible, or just make a better building out of the project. So all through our projects, there's stories of us going and finding $1 million, going and finding $6 million for projects. So this development arm became a kind of part of the firm. And then Ann was getting a call from a superintendent from a school district that we worked with, Dr. Mina Bryan, early, and she kept saying, well, she called Ann and said, "Can you come over and help me interview janitors?" And she was young and she was terrific. She was a great educator, a visionary superintendent, but running buildings, And then she said one day,
And why can't I turn off this unit in the middle of the summertime? You know,
yeah.
why can't I just shut these buildings down? You know, just how do I maintain and keep the buildings operating well? And we had always worked to design mechanical systems to be maintainable in rural places. But if you want your building to perform well, that's not always easy, you know, finding maintenance people to take care of it. So she was always asking us these questions about how do we do this? And I said, you know, architects should take care of these buildings. We put them together. We know how they should be taken care of. So we didn't do it right then. We just were there when she needed us. But we said we can make a part of the business that does this, and in turn teaches us. And that's what's been so amazing about having that arm of the business, is it really makes you think about the life of the buildings you put out into the world and how to make them continue to serve the clients for years and years to come, and not be an impediment to their missions, but be a contributor to their long-term missions.
So this all became a kind of way of finding a practice in Mississippi where there are limited resources. We put together these 3 activities, and each of them generates different kinds of fees and different kinds of, it's a business plan. We designed a business plan, but more importantly, we redesigned what we thought was practice. We called it an expanded practice. Why would an architect only be involved in the design of the building from the time you get hired to the time the construction is finished? We know a lot more about how to make buildings better and counsel communities, and we know a lot more about how to care for buildings. So why shouldn't the profession expand? So that's a little bit about our practice. But along the way, we also became an advocate for our community. We host community events. We bring the community together. Our staff are involved in these events and parties and lectures, and we are advocates. Occasionally, there's laws that need to be changed, and so sometimes we're proud of the fact that the design problem is not always a building. Sometimes it's a law that needs to be changed. So our school district is suffering from having too many buildings because of a loss of population. We changed the law to allow them, to facilitate them to sell these schools for developments, for housing, for mixed use, for job training. So sometimes it's not about building. Quickly, we started the firm and the practice as an experiment, as an educational experiment. Could we design a firm in this place of need, and could we develop a way of practicing that was more focused on the consequences in the public? And that meant we had to rethink everything we were taught and everything we knew about practice. So what's on the left here is a list of what we call foundations. And these are the values we collected over 27 years. Just short little sayings, short little beliefs about how to practice, how we wanted to practice, how we wanted to see our practice develop. And on the right are some propositions that are overarching over all projects. If the murmuration in the middle is really just it's the conclusion to a book, which we published 2 years ago, saying that all of these things are wound together in complicated ways. And but the murmuration was the only way we thought about, well, that was our conclusion. So there is a book. It's a report on this firm. It's really designed for you guys to think about what you want to do with your career, how to think about what values are important to you as a young architect. Not that these are answers, but these will provoke you to think about your own way of contributing to your community, thinking about what the role of architecture is in our society, and maybe how you might improve the profession. So a little report, that's a little report on us. We're going to talk about 3 projects, 3 and a half projects. Yeah. This book is set up like with foundations. Each foundation is a value. Engagement is one of them. Engaging buildings entangle us in a world of difference and description. Explanation and its forces of simplification are necessarily pushed to the background. What does that mean? This is a direct statement about authority and about how we interact in the world. You know, we are often told what's important, told what to buy, told what's popular. Our buildings sometimes carry messages of power and instruction. And Ann and I, in a very early building, started to think about this problem. And it was a library, and I'm going to talk about it. It's an early project where we raised these questions for ourselves. Could architecture move from a position of instruction and maybe provoke education, provoke inquiry, provoke the need to perceive yourself perceiving? In other words, to expand your sensibilities. You all don't realize it, but your ability to see color or two different colors is limited by your experience. Well, you can train your eye, you can train your sensibilities to expand that capacity to see more distinctions and more fine-grained differences in color. And that's true of all of our sensations. So we got really interested in thinking about what the difference between inquiry and instruction was, and how that played out in the design and making of buildings. This first project we're talking about kind of sets the stage for really work that follows. So we're just going to dwell on it just a minute, more in terms of just the questions that it raised for us. If we are following instructions, then we are very much a consumer, passive. Everything we're doing is really already set up for us. If we are challenged, if we're surprised, if we come across circumstances that challenge our sensibilities or our memory, we start to ask questions. We start to think about what's possible or what are we perceiving. So this question of authority emerged really early in our practice. And we didn't really know how to think about it. So we went to art and we said, well, like, how does this play out in the history of art? And the art historians, if there's any in the room, apologies for this very bad, very short history of art. But Raphael's School of Athens, single point perspective, the authority, Plato and Socrates are at the center. You're at the opposite. This painting hits you right between the eyes. Everything is telling you what the answer is and what all the questions are. Cubists said, wait a minute, that's not enough. If we spread time across the surface, all of a sudden it activates your perception. You become an author in the painting. You start to assemble fragments and you start to become part of the work, part of the creative act. But it's the abstract expressionists which really got us excited, because they said, well, we're not telling you anything. We're just making a surface, and we're pushing space out into the world, into your world, and you stand here, you're our witness and completely a part of the creative act. So incredible freedom and access to this question of inquiry almost directly. We also looked at architecture, and after before the French Revolution, when monarchies controlled society, they ruled by fear. Authoritarian governments rule by fear. So if you steal a loaf of bread, the monarchy couldn't control everybody, so they would just cut off your hand. And it gets around, right? Oh my gosh, he stole bread, he lost his hand. Everybody's afraid to steal bread. So that ruling by fear is a kind of way in societies were controlled. Well, after the French Revolution, democratic institutions had to be invented. We had to kind of develop a way of communicating identity and order and control across a group of people who were seen as equals, seen as participants in a society. So you see the birth of museums, you see city halls, you see libraries, you see hospitals, you see prisons emerge. And the classic example architectural is the Alt Museum by Schinkel. The classic form of these institutions tended to be a center space. Foucault calls it the eye of power. Its space had no purpose except establishing the identity of the controlling power, the government, whatever it was, municipality, city, country. Institutions. And then everything in the periphery was seen in relation to this identity that's established the control. So, Jefferson used this to establish the identity of the American landscape and institutions. And this is something Ann and I began to react against. This is the plan of the Library Commission. We wanted to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe there is no center. Maybe there is just inquiry. Maybe there's just a pause and move plan. Maybe there's just a series of pauses, inner horizons to attract you going in different directions. So the Library Commission, if there's a center, it's out on the lawn beyond. And we kind of tried to make plans that started to articulate this question of opening inquiry. The second part to this question of authority is to draw you out of yourself and draw you into the changes in our environment. Remember Mississippi's got this beautiful light. It's got this incredible seasonal changes of storms. And we realized that if you come to a building on Wednesday and it's different than it was last Tuesday significantly, maybe it challenges your memory. Maybe you see it, maybe it awakens the subject. Maybe it awakens your sensibilities a little bit. So this idea that we could fuse light to the surfaces and we could draw light in buildings and get that sense of aliveness to run through buildings became a theme in the work. And so just a few images of this project, the pauses and moves, the entry, a porch, the solid doors, porches throughout the building, this penumbra condition running through all the work. This is the reading room where we actually push the reading space to the edge of the library. And then to the right is a loft, which is another porch within a porch, a horizon beyond the horizons. So this theme of working through this question of authority for us began as a kind of search for how to make a building engaging and promote inquiry.
Can you keep switching for me?
Okay, yep, I can.
So another privilege of living in Mississippi is that the cues to history and culture that are embedded in the built environment haven't been obliterated by economic progress. Okay, that's a bad thing. That's also a good thing because Roy mentioned that I was doing these historic structures report when I was working for Wayne Timmer right out of school. The places I was seeing in the archival footage of the movement still existed. The Quonset huts where protesters had been sort of temporarily imprisoned is where we went to buy our Christmas trees. So you had this built environment that still had the history in it, right? You could still see the places, still walk through the places where those historical things had happened. We as architects are often charged with that obliteration. Like we have to remove a space to add a new building, to move forward in that regard. It's a complicated place to be. So what we've always tried to do is understand that there is a history in every place, that it has an impact on not just the very specific spot you are working in, but it has informed that whole culture and that whole place that you're working in. So even when we have to come into a place and remove something, we bring that history forward. It is part of the design of the process. It's part of the engagement of the work on every process. Next. So at Tougaloo College, I said it's complicated. The heroism of what happened here at Tougaloo is alive and well and palpable on this historic black college, which is just north of Jackson. So in relation to the story Roy told about Mississippi in general, this is another example of a place where this specifically worked itself out. So next, if you don't mind. So like I said, it's just north of Jackson. It wasn't in the city of limits of Jackson in the 50s and 60s, but it is now. But back in its history, after the land was taken from native inhabitants in that time frame we talked about earlier, John Bodie founded a plantation here operated by enslaved people. And by many accounts, he was not a very good businessman and not a good person by any means. So his plantation failed, and it was taken over and bought by the American Missionary Association, who founded a school here. Their goal being to educate freed slaves and all other people who had been denied access to education. Go ahead. So this is the gate on the left. This is the original gate to the campus. Tougaloo really became later in the 50s and 60s the heart of the civil rights movement in central Mississippi. Because it was just north of the city, it was like a relative sanctuary. People could feel safe to gather there, to plan protests and events. And so many of those that happened here. People would come here to figure out what they were going to do, how they were going to do nonviolent protest of the era, and then march out of these gates and go to do those protests. So one of the instigators of the movement was Ernst Berinsky. He was a German Jewish immigrant who had made his home at Tougaloo, and he's this very serious fellow in the upper right-hand corner. He decided to teach social science seminars to students on campus, and he started bringing all people from across the country who were interested in the movement and teaching students about the ideas of it, not just the ideas of it, but also the strategy of nonviolent protest. And he did those seminars in a building that was called Beard Hall. And when we got involved to do the Benny G. Thompson Civil Rights Center at Tougaloo, Beard Hall was already gone, but that was the site where we were going to put this new building. So we found it important to remember that history in that place. And also our president of the college, Beverly Hogan, also challenged us with the same thing, bring the history forward. So Roy talked about authority, and we'll keep talking about that in several of these projects we talk about today. The Bodie Mansion claimed authority on the, can you go back one real quick? Claimed authority on campus formally and architecturally. It claimed that authority. So here it is, the building number 1. The red building is the building we were coming back with. You can also see that in the larger site plan. It claimed the highest point on campus. You can go to the next one. It was symmetrical, it was tall in proportion. If you approach this building, you feel small in relation to it, and you know that maybe you shouldn't walk up on that porch unless you are invited and able to be there. So it claims all of that. It has a tower. You could feel surveyed by this building across the entire plantation. Next. So the Benny Thompson Center, in contrast to the mansion, shifts the authority from the institution to individuals through its built form. It's asymmetrical. It doesn't claim the highest point of the land. It sits on the slope and engages the sloping landscape. And there is no all-seeing sort of singular tower. Everyone has access to have a prospect across the campus. Go ahead. And like the Library Commission, there is, and unlike the Altus Museum, there are multiple centers, and all of those centers are purposefully visible to one another. So visual access is access. Before you enter a space, you know what it is, you can take a lay of the land, you can feel empowered to then decide which steps you're going to take. So that pause and move plan is an idea about access as well. And the porch is not like that imposing porch on the Bodie Mansion. It's not an imposing figure. The entry is not an imposing figure. It's a transparent corner that sort of slips in behind this colonnade, and you're invited to sort of linger on this long shaded porch along the campus center. So halls and corridors have been widened to create margins for students to claim, really to sort of take possession of in the space. You can climb upon and even sit on the building while you're studying or holding discussions or reading in the building. Another foundation in the book, number 4, says that we should challenge the conceptual bias of our time. For us, this has always meant that we should avoid narrative content in buildings. And this is a lesson we learned from Robert Irwin, artist, abstract artist. And what he says is naming of a thing short circuits your experience of a thing. So the moment that you have a name for it, you've read it, and you're less likely to experience all of its characteristics and how those characteristics are interacting with the phenomena around it. So when President Beverly Hogan asked us to include the college's civil rights photography in the building itself, to include this narrative content in the physical building, we were like, oh, I mean, this thing that we've tried not to do in buildings, not to have narrative content, we're going to have to sort of tackle this. So instead of saying that we would compete with that, we decided we'd find a way to bring that narrative content into the building and hopefully amplify it with the experience of being within it. So what we did is we made these transitions between the wings of the buildings, these aluminum clad thresholds, we called them, And they're kind of tight, and they're larger than life images on each side, this collection sort of brought up so that you hopefully feel sort of palpably, architecturally, the experience of the movement and the things that were happening during the movement.
We thought of them as memory theaters. Goes back to that question of our origins and bringing forward that history. These memory theaters for students that are there now that don't know, and Dr. Hogan said this to us, the students that attend those schools now don't know the struggles their parents and grandparents fought for their freedom, for their access to opportunity. So she wanted the reminder built into the building. She's really quite brilliant of how to repressurize, to make re-present those memories for the new students.
Right, to make them palpable. So the building was the first, again, back to this limited funds, the first building for educational purposes on the campus since 1959. So it had a really varied program from housing Tougaloo's art collection, which is a whole other set of stories of how they ended up with such a great African art and modern art collection. So we had to show that art and store that art in an art vault, have a multi-purpose lecture hall, standard classrooms, and also a conference center in the building. So there was a lot of need to put together in many different things in the building. Go ahead. So what was interesting is we were privileged to get to go to the building opening, in which people who were in these photographs, alumni, freedom riders, Benny G. Thompson himself, who the building was named for, John Lewis, all came for the opening of the building. And instead of standing in the larger halls in the gallery, they all compressed into these memory theaters that Roy was talking about, this sort of seeing themselves in those photos and continuing, all of them still continuing their work in the movement as well. So we submitted the Benny G. Thompson Center to Porch, an Architecture of Generosity, the exhibit of the American Pavilion at this year's Biennale in Venice. And we were honored to be invited to design one of the exhibits in the American Pavilion. So our window is an analytique, a representation of the building and its place, the sanctuary that is Tougaloo College. The porch frames and organizes the exhibit. Yep, there we go, thank you. Frames and organizes around one of the columns of the porch of the Benny G. Thompson building. And draws the viewer in to a model of one of those thresholds inside the space. So when you get your face sort of into that, there's a mirrored background, and some of those civil rights images are also on the back of the column of the porch. So it really kind of brings you in and tells you to imagine how you are part of that same work, because you see yourself reflected while you see these other images in the work. And one more thing about that, Roy. When we talked about that marginal space, both at the Library Commission and the spaces for students to claim, that's a physical strategy, a formal strategy. And at the bottom of the window here is a bell hooks quote, choosing the margin as a space of radical openness. And that's true, I think, about Jackson and Detroit. These places where people have been left behind are also the places of creative freedom and creative
And remember those heroes that we found when we got to Mississippi. They're all working from the margin and have changed our whole country.
Architects intervene into history and community, and we try not to confuse this responsibility with having any special theoretical knowledge to impose any meaning. Instead, we research, we observe, we learn about the history of place, and we practice. We do things over and over again and make interventions that make connections and even critiques of the places that we're moving into. And what we ask is, can an intervention, an architectural intervention, be therapeutic? Can it be educational or celebratory? But these are all drawn out of the aspirations, the history, the people, the physical environment and the conditions of a place. So we recently completed a building in Springdale, Arkansas. And Springdale's on the Razorback Greenway, which you see here. that runs from Bentonville to Fayetteville. And in this area of Northwest Arkansas, people often say, if you want culture, you go to Bentonville with its museums and galleries. It's got Crystal Bridges is in Bentonville. If you want education, you go to Fayetteville, which is home of the University of Arkansas. If you want your tractor fixed, you go to Springdale, Arkansas. And that turns out to be really true. A lot of this, you all have probably seen projects happening in Northwest Arkansas. The people, the subcontractors, the contractors building that work are coming from Springdale. That's where they live and work. And this was really a great fit, a chance to do what we did in Jackson, to do again in Springdale, learn about this place and find a way to express the sort of civic aspirations of this very craft-oriented, blue-collar place, very proud of the work that they do. So the Springdale Municipal Complex is a Walton Family Design Excellence project. It really was the first public project in the program. So the design fees were funded by Walton, so we were allowed to do this work on the funds from the Walton Foundation. But the construction, all of it, would be funded by the citizens of Springdale, and more on that later. And we suspected, and we found out later from one of the people on the selection committee for that the budget was so low for this Walton Family project that they said, these guys practicing in Jackson, Mississippi, they will be able to do something with this small budget, and that was proven true later. So we were charged with consolidating the police department, a district courthouse, and the city administration offices, and renovating part of an existing building, so it was a renovation and addition. And all of the city services had been spread across the city in different places and lots of not so great spaces. So we were consolidating them into one 125,000 square foot building that would be completed in 2 phases and happen through COVID, so a lot of work there. So the building is arranged by a generous arcade, which really is an interior public street parallel to Spring Street, the park, and the Razorback Greenway. So that's the Razorback Greenway going across the screen there. It has a single public entry under the new City Council chamber, which will provide a clear and secure entry to the building. And the new district court sits along the arcade between the City Council and the police headquarters. So courthouses, police stations, city halls, we hope these public institutions wield the most benevolent authority. There's definitely authority in these institutions. So the buildings that we make for them should talk about how those institutions serve each individual. So imperfect though they may be, those forms should embody a sense of the community's collective hope for a better society. So I'll talk about how we work to arrange all of the public, private, and secure functions and shape the building to be an expression of civic form. But first I want to talk a bit about the exterior enclosure as part of that civic expression. So we didn't have the budget to enclose the building with stone or glass or even brick on all surfaces or some other expensive rain screen assembly. So we figured out how to use a really common material, precast concrete, to achieve a civic presence. So in every new project in here in Springdale, and as Roy mentioned at the Library Commission, we try to amplify the ever-changing light phenomena around a building, the sunlight, its highlights and shadows across the building's surface. So we do it in different ways with different materials. And in the Library Commission, that shadow that was created was made with just a 3/4 inch recess on the surface, which could make these huge shadows. But the scale of this building and the size of it and a large north-facing wall said we needed to make that bolder here. So we increased the aggregate in the mix and increased the depth of the surface. So you get these great bold shadows across the surface. And this is amazing on the south side, which you just saw. But on the north side, it's really even more sort of amazing in its subtlety. There is no light, direct light hitting this north surface that you're looking at right here. So you get the way that surface modulates the light. You can see the morning light is red on one surface, and then you can see the the blue surface on what is sort of turned straight to the north. So it actually brings not just highlight and shadow, but the difference in the color of the light to the surface, and you can actually identify those differences. Okay, go ahead. So as I mentioned, it was an extremely limited budget, so we included renovation of the existing administration building to the right, and then a new police headquarters and court facility and city council chamber. So we prioritized where we spent the money in the project. The public spaces and the public arcade, which you see in the sort of orange color here, are elevated in their durability, and then the blue areas in the back are sort of downgraded, flexible, typical construction. So we had to make that sort of priority in the strategy. So this project, as I mentioned, built in 2 phases and through COVID, was completed for under $300 a square foot. So all of it. So and you'll see some of the interiors on that. So next. So each department is identified by its major public space, which then is expressed on the exterior as a figure. The left is that public meeting room, which is in the police facility. In the middle is the court volume, which is poking up beyond the arcade. And then, as I mentioned before, the city council chamber sits over the main entry. And then each of those has these metal-clad louvers, which were intentionally handcrafted in this place. Those are not store-bought louvers. They're made with pieces of metal because of these craftsmen in this city who can do that sort of work. And those louvers are what modulate the sunlight coming into these spaces. Go ahead. So inside each of those public figures is organized along the arcade. The courtroom entry is here to the left. Durable, natural, handcrafted materials characterize the arcade and each of those main public spaces. And the form inside each of these is distinct but similar and linked in character across. They're all related by the use of worn wood and a celebration of natural light. So in the courtroom, we brought natural light through the exposed structure of clear stories along the axis of the approach to the judge's bench, which is an important sort of move in that process of justice. And then in the city council chamber, it's more like a pinwheel condition that brings light in on all 4 sides into the city council chamber. So with all phases complete, including the park between the complex and the greenway, which is, we don't actually have photographs without the building that was in front. It's now open to the greenway and complete. And the community was involved throughout this design process. As I mentioned earlier, this was going to be funded by them. They were included in meetings early in the process, in schematic design meetings along the way. And they had the design before them to vote on the bond issue that would spend their funds on the money. And it was really a record in the city. It passed by 80% of the vote. So they saw the value had been part of the process and knew that this would contribute to
the largest single funding approval for the city for a city project. Okay. And just the last thing, this question about authority. When we programmed the building, when we met with all the community members through the community engagement process, they all wanted access to these rooms that are normally hidden in the belly of the building, council chamber, court, or community room. So we worked the security and the circulation, so all of those rooms are accessible to the public. So if you come in, you could have a quilting seminar in the council chamber, you could have a wedding in the court, you could host community lectures in the police headquarters. So all of that stays on the public side of security. So there's no denial for these public rooms for the citizens of Springdale. All right, just a footnote really. I talked about the storms in Mississippi. We also get tornadoes. Several years ago, we were asked, we're fortunate to be selected for a federal courthouse in Greenville, Mississippi. I mentioned Greenville was one of the port cities that shipped cotton and lumber all over the world. Well, and I also mentioned how wealthy it was. It was the wealthiest community in America prior to the Civil War. So a federal courthouse in Greenville, Mississippi, our assignment was not this. This is what's almost finished right now. Our assignment was this. A federal courthouse organized by the Courts Guide, which puts the courtrooms in the belly of the building so you don't really know where they are, and with the explicit instructions to make a classical building. Pediment, columns, white, sit back from the street, the Alt Museum, right? So think about it for a second. It didn't take us long to think, this is a community where not everyone had access to justice. In fact, the wealth and the well-being of this community celebrated in the history of the community was a denial of those individuals who helped create that wealth. So the question for us was, how do we reconcile this place, this history, the origins of this place, with the explicit instructions of the court and the federal government, GSA? Well, we did it with research and the stories of the place. We actually hired Dr. Michael Fazio, this architectural historian, to write a dissertation on this community with instructions, really, a guide to describe all the different ethnicities and individuals that made up this community, and describe the court. What role did the court play in this community? And it turns out there were Jewish families and Chinese families and Russian families. Steinmart stores were started in Greenville, Mississippi, as well as African American community that was also in poverty by this time. I mean, the community in the Delta had lost its economic abilities, really, and value. So that dissertation allowed us to talk to the judges, allowed us to talk to the federal government representatives about the complexity of a place. So Ann and I often say, architecture is not an aesthetic event. And if you see it as an aesthetic event or a technological event or a transaction for a profit, in many ways you are selling short our responsibility to our entire culture and our entire history. Architecture really is a cultural artifact that has the power to be educational, that has the power to be therapeutic, has the power to create, or at least open the possibility for opportunities and free thinking, the inquiry question coming back. So, here is the history of Greenville, going back to enslaved peoples and sharecropping. And every building that was built in Greenville, really from prior to the Civil War to, well after, was an expression of material and architecture that was popular at the time because the wealthy class would go buy their buildings and buy their aesthetic and put it there. So this is a community that in a way is a demonstration of power. So how could we intervene in a more therapeutic way was really our charge. So what we did, and this is a very fast summary of 4 or 5 years worth of work, and a lot of design work and a lot of discussions with federal judges who
it's still not complete.
And it's still not complete.
Construction
Federal judges who are absolutely sure they know better than everybody, and they're not wrong. They're brilliant and they're smart and they weigh the facts, right?
That's right.
But as we brought this story forward, as we brought propositions for this project, that a federal courthouse, the third branch of government distributed in our country, a powerfully important building, not Jefferson's vision of power, but maybe this more democratic vision of power, that the people in the community would see both the importance of this building, but also the fulfillment of the promise for access to justice, which had been denied so many. We pulled the courtrooms out of the belly of the building from that diagram and put them inside a wooden box inside this glass veil, so that we call it the view from the school bus. Everybody driving by can see people coming and going to court through the glass. So this building is space, this margin, this porch is actually the invitation for the identity, not of power, but of the empowerment of individuals. We hope. We hope.
And it's not that we didn't. We met that diagram. There are 3 separate modes of movement throughout the building that are kept separate until everyone comes together in the courtroom. All of the technical and security facts of that court's diagram are still met here, even with that courtroom pulled out and accessible to the public.
Here's the courtroom.
Being punched, so this is a rendering.
Yes,
It
yes.
almost looks like this, almost.
We were in it last week doing the punch list.
Yep.
And I mentioned the history of the courts. Judge Cady, who was the judge all through the 60s, was known as one of the only judges in Mississippi who believed in the Constitution. So a lot of civil rights cases, a lot of prison reform cases, a lot of the school integration cases that were filed in Mississippi were filed in this court. So this court, again, like the civil rights leaders, like the blues musicians, this court, in the tradition of this court, the older building, but in this place, was also responsible for decisions that were precedents that helped change our country. So we had that to live up to as well. Again, bringing light to the building, making an environmentally sophisticated and mature building, energy efficient, thoughtful, and low consumer of energy, but also bringing that light, fuse it to the surface. And then at night, the building kind of glows from the interior, and view from the school bus is always possible.
And for us, it really is, I think, as we've said, through this lens of authority, which is what we decided to talk about here. Form for us, Roy said, it's not a transaction. It's not only a transaction. It's not only an aesthetic event, but it's not a proclamation of meaning. It's a sort of pursuit of meaning that you take when you are going to add to the built environment of a place. So that's sort of the goal of that, is the pursuit of a meaningful form that grows out of the place that you're in. So, great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Originally, we were imagining to have a little bit of discussions, but we are running a bit late. So I was wondering if there is any questions that I can take from the audience to speak about their work. I can also get started. Would you like to take a seat?
Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, apologies for going a little long. You all are such a great audience. You all looked interested.
I got one here.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Thank you for your talk. I'm just wondering how you think about the antebellum structures, when you're designing these newer structures, how what you're designing will interact with those older buildings.
The Tougaloo Mansion is an antebellum structure, and it was one of the original buildings on that campus, and so that Benny Thompson building is a direct contrast to the structure, to the antebellum embedded power structures that are in that building. I mean, it's not unlike the Alts Museum, right? You come up into a center hall, all elevated, as Ann talked about. The Benny Thompson building is completely without that kind of hierarchy. So we generally are looking to be in contrast to that sort of social structure that's implied by the power of that kind of architecture.
But also engaged in the history of it, as Tougaloo as an institution is. I mean, they have kept that mansion and restored it and renovated it and kept it as the history is still present there. So then there are lessons in all of that, lessons of scale and how to create a sense of awe and create a sense of feeling important in the world. So in a way it's contrast, but in a way we're also students of all of that. How does the durability of detailing we're not building in wood very often, but how do you get that durability in this climate? We're learning from those structures as well. So it's in contrast, but it's informed by as well.
Can you talk a little bit about the community engagement in that, what was it, Springdale, and how you were able to get that sort of community approval for the pavement to pay for that construction, and what sort of engagement you had to have with the community to get that endorsement and millage?
It's so typical community engagement by architects looks a little bit like this. Architects do an analysis, they get some alternatives, they get some prerequisites about what the owner or the circumstance wants, and they take them and put them up on the wall, and they give residents sticky notes. Which one do you like? Well, there's a whole series of things that are wrong with that. One is the residents have not actually voiced their opinion about what's important before they're already presented with solutions, right? The second thing is the architects have already built their preconceptions, and their preconceptions are not based on the history, the origins, or the place. So we're pretty critical of the way in which the profession approaches really a kind of transactional attitude towards community engagement. So when we do a planning project, or when we're doing a programming effort in any community or any project, our first meeting, or sometimes the first and second, third meeting, we don't take anything. We just go and say, what's going on? What are the issues? What's most important? And we go talk to people that don't just come to the community meetings, right? You got to hear the quiet voices who are not always speaking, right? So we go to the churches, and we go to the Boys and Girls Club, and children are great informants because they tell you more truthful than the parents do. So out of that kind of listening comes the real issues that are important. That's when we start thinking about alternatives. And then when we go back to the community, everything we show them first starts, here's how this works towards what you were saying. Tell us if this is, they're verifying their worries in your proposals rather than responding to what's the best of the alternative of bad choices. So we're pretty tough on the practice of community engagement. It's important to listen.
But we do bring, the one thing we do bring into the room is the research.
Yeah.
So you bring the research and you make it spatial too. So when you bring demographic information or economic information, you start locating it in space. So, the only thing we do bring is that, because that brings a lot of the discussion.
A lot of communities don't know their own history. Like Fazio's report, there was not actually a history of Greenville. So then we contributed that to the library.
And that was a short form of that for the courthouse, of that conversation, but it's not like we ever said, okay, let's not do that classical building y'all said at the beginning. We went all through the process together and went through that history together, and everybody came to the solution we ended up with together in that regard. So it wasn't like we said, let's say no. We didn't say, no, that's not what we're going to do. We said, let's work through the process and bring to the table the facts.
The precast concrete in Springdale was outlawed by their form code, so it was not acceptable. And if you go to Northwest Arkansas, there's some terrific buildings that are metal panel buildings. Our good friend Marlin is like an ace at it, right? And beautiful, well-crafted buildings, but metal panels for a civic building that's got to last 50 or 100 years. That doesn't work. So we had to work through even the variances of material in their form code, and it wasn't hard. It was about engaging the community in the search for, when they realized, and we had to do models and drawings and whatnot to show them, when they realized it wasn't the concrete that was bringing the civic quality to the surface of that building, it was the light. The concrete was a foil for what was really civic. It was the material change and the liveness of the surface.
Hi. So you mentioned, I like how you mentioned in the beginning how architecture and the built environment has been used in ways that systemically like still impact communities today. And one thing that I've noticed as a student is like the lack of representation within our architecture field of those communities, and that's because of that systemic oppression, right? Like there's a lack of access and resources to our education. And ultimately, like, in other words, I would just say it's dominated by like white males and architects that come from a privileged background. And if we want to make changes and really represent those communities, what changes can we make, like as architects coming in as a new generation, to remedy that barrier to our field and encourage more diversity and access that'll ultimately make us better as a field for people?
I think it's to remember it's complicated first, right? Like, and to bring that complication to the table. And then after that, you bring your individual perspective as well, right? So your individual perspective is valuable when you've made the problem big enough for everyone to see it. And the problem is big enough. The ramifications of any building in a culture, in a place, are large. And if you expand that question of what it is that we're doing, then you make room for your individual perspective and your individual history to have a place in that.
And others.
And others, the other people in the room. So the reason I say your individual perspective is because you will be the designer or one of the designers. And I should say that it is not an individual pursuit. We mentioned the first slide is the people in our office, because the best idea wins in our office. We're all looking at bringing that complicated problem to the table and making sure as many people can talk about it as possible. And as many people can ask what's important as possible. So it's making the problem big enough to have those multiple voices be heard, if that helps.
So you'd say, like, as an architect, like, we're beholden to using our voices for the underrepresented?
Right,
Well,
and
but no. You can't be an interpreter for what you have a bias about, right? I mean, you can't be, architects are really guilty of thinking they know what's best for somebody else.
Right.
That's a terrible error that runs through the egocentric dominance of the profession. So when Anne's talking about making the project big enough, she's talking about making the project big enough for many voices to have authority in the conversation about a project.
This follow-up question with that. You mentioned, I might have misheard it, but like how like the rich were like buying land in order to like continue to like push, their agenda, or to have that power by like having ownership over our built environment. If we want to like use the built environment to serve like underrepresented communities, but our funding comes from that 1%. I know you mentioned just going out and finding that funding regardless. But like, what can we do to change things systemically so that way more funding comes from the people and it's actually serving the people?
It's a great question. And so sometimes the money does come from an elite source or an institution. The example really is the courthouse. We didn't let the courthouse be dominated by the opinion that came automatically as a prerequisite from the money. And the way we did that was make the problem bigger, right? Include the voices of unheard, right, in the process. And then, we think about ourselves as, we call ourselves servant leaders, and for us, that means teachers. And the way it's in the book, actually, we wrote this in the book. What that means is illuminating what's important, what's public, what is public value when people can't see it. So it's not so much that we interpret or we have some special authority. We keep the focus on the quality of the larger public value, no matter who funds the project. I know we're going long. You all are so patient.
Yeah.
You got classes.
Take off if you need to, yes.
Yeah, I would love to.
You all are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry we went long.
It happens.
My city is actually putting